Hello one and all, this is Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again with another video game first impressions. This time around, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Strangers of Paradise is the Final Fantasy 1 spin-off, an action-adventure RPG helmed by Team Ninja and Koei Tecmo that focuses more on the action-adventure hack-and-slash Neo-style action instead of the turn-based action that the original Final Fantasy was based off of. I did a review of the first demo, though they've done several demos since, and I was kind of indifferent. I was kind of, to a certain extent, I was put off because the game, while it played okay, and this in that regard is very similar to, say, Neo in the regard of the action and the combat being more time-based. You have to react very quickly. You have to be prepared for enemy patterns, and you have to learn those patterns, and you have to strike hard and fast, and then in certain instances, especially when it comes to boss fights, maybe just strike once and get out of the way because the retaliatory attack that's coming could wipe you out. You can utilize light and heavy strikes. You can also guard. One of the most important defensive measures is the Soul Shield that, when utilized properly, can not only parry an incoming attack, but depending on the attack in regards to the enemies, they have these regular attacks, orange attacks that can be interrupted if you hit them enough times, purple attacks which can be absorbed by the Soul Shield, and of course red attacks which are unblockable. Now, if you utilize the Soul Shield at the right time and actually absorb those purple attacks, you can utilize those attacks in the case of the PlayStation by hitting the square button. So for an example, a bomb can send off a fire spell, and if the player utilizes Jack, who is the main playable protagonist, and utilize that Soul Shield, he will absorb the fire spell and be able to utilize it whenever the player sees fit, as long as Jack doesn't die in battle. And that's another important factor that must be mentioned when it comes to death in this game. The only checkpoints are these save spears. Now, when you die, your max MP, which is connected to not only your ability to do magic attacks, but also your ability to do special maneuvers and special attacks connected to whatever job class Jack is utilizing at that time. When you do die, your max MP will go down permanently until you're able to do the Soul Shatter attack, which is, in the case of the PlayStation, after you utilize enough attacks that lowers the break gauge, which is pretty much a stun meter that both the enemies and Jack has. You can use the circle button to do this slam attack. So you may start off with, say, 200 MP at the start of a mission, but if you continue to live and utilize Soul Shatter attacks, you can increase your MP to the maximum. Now, another thing about the spheres that you utilize to save, it also restores whatever enemies you've defeated. Speaking of inventory, one of the biggest draws and disappointments when it comes to this game is the amount of inventory that is thrown at the players. The amount of loot that is given to the players is ridiculous, and that may sound beneficial, but there are two big issues with this. One is the limited inventory size. So by the second and third chapter, you will be full of inventory if you do not go through and actually dismantle the inventory to utilize that, where the materials gained from that dismantled inventory will be able to upgrade other inventory like weapons and shields and outfits and attire that you want to keep for a little bit longer. But when it comes to the inventory, it is based on levels. So more than likely, by the time you finish a run of another chapter, you will have inventory and new weapons and new armor that is over leveled compared to the inventory that you had that was what you believed stuff that you wanted to keep for a very long time. Another big inventory problem is the lack of defined design. If you have an item that is the same name but a different level, it looks exactly the same. The only differences, of course, will be the stats and the rarity level that is associated with it. So you will have to manually go through and look to figure out what is the best option for you. There is an optimized outfit option, but it's not the best because one of the main things when it comes to gear is the affinity levels associated with the job classes. A big positive about this game is the amount of job classes that you can unlock pretty quickly in the game. You can go from a swordsman to a ronin, that is one of my favorite job classes, or you can become a war master who utilizes an axe for very heavy, long-winded charge attacks that, if they do land, can cause significant bleeding and maybe even a one-hit kill. There are mages that can have both black, red, blue, or even white, and you can actually mix and match these job classes. As you expand the skill trees that are associated with them, you can only have 2 job classes activated at a time, so you will have to choose wisely. One thing that I do love about it though is that when it comes to job class choices, the player doesn't necessarily feel hampered if you pick something and switch it to another job class and enter another mission, even if you're at the starting level of that job class. Now, while you only have 2 job classes attached to Jack at a time, you can switch those job classes at the save spears that I mentioned earlier. I've mentioned magic several times in this review, and unfortunately, just like in the demo, I do not like the execution of magic in this game. A weapon wheel pops up. Of course, this is in real time, so you cannot slow it down, and at times it will be kind of hard to aim, especially when enemies are coming towards you or jumping back or jumping to the left, right, what have you. This is coupled by the fact that at times if you are trying to dodge an attack and you're trying to set up a magic attack at the same time, you may accidentally move the weapon wheel to a different spell and then throw out a spell that is something that you didn't want to throw or is not even effective against the enemy. Enemies are pretty much what you expect. The majority of them are, of course, Final Fantasy staples, while being grunts, and you'll see them numerous times and learn their patterns and their abilities and what to take advantage of. But there are also those times, especially when you're taking on something like a Tonberry, that they will throw out massive damage heavy attacks out of nowhere. You will not be prepared, you will not be able to guard, you will not be able to block, and then at times they will break your gauge and stun you without warning, and then before you can recover, or by the time you do recover, you'll be hit again and it is game over. In terms of narrative, there's not much here from what I've seen thus far, other than the fact that Jack and his cohorts are trying to take down Chaos. They've discovered this entity that is possessing many a creature that they must find the source of and destroy. That's pretty much the whole story. The big takeaway from the game thus far in terms of the narrative is not necessarily the actual story, but the presentation and the odes to future Final Fantasy games in the series in terms of what would follow 1. Unfortunately, a lot of that design and the musical choice that does harken back to those old games that would follow Final Fantasy 1 isn't done very well, so it's kind of hard to pick up on certain aspects if you don't really look it up or don't have a deep history and knowledge of the Final Fantasy franchise. Technically, the game is sound. As I said, there are moments when it comes to hit detection and just enemies being relatively cheap that feels like death is not warranted. There have been, especially early in the game, a lot of slowdown during not only hectic battles, but also just moving around different environments. I'm playing on the PlayStation 5, I'm playing the PlayStation 5 version, and I've seen some frame rate drops that I was surprised for, especially given the graphical output of this game. It looks like more of an early PS4 game instead of an early PS5 adaptation. There's also an online component where you can play with friends, up to 2 friends of course, and it is solid. It definitely makes the game a lot easier if you're playing with humans instead of the AI, even though the AI is a lot better in this version than it was in the original demo. The only big problem when it comes to the AI is the unfortunate inability to tell the AI what you want it to do. You can actually kind of activate an overdrive mode for the AI once their meters are filled, and they will do big attacks like Blizzaga and even haste and shell that they wouldn't normally do if you hadn't activated that overdrive ability. But other than that, you can't change or modify their combo patterns like you can for Jack, your character that you play as. You can modify their abilities even if you change their jobs, and the jobs that they do have are very minor in terms of options compared to Jack. Even though you unlock all of these different job classes for Jack, each of your companions can only have a set amount of job classes unlocked for them. Overall, Stranger of Paradise is a very solid experience, a very good action RPG style game, once again very similar to Nioh, that I actually enjoyed a lot more than I expected, even when some of the tougher boss battles and harder moments and even cheap losses occurred. I do like this game a lot, but it's not something that I say that you need to go out and rush and play right now, especially considering how many other games have come out in the last few months. But if this is your type of game, as I said, something similar to Nioh or kind of a dumbed down Elden Ring and the FromSoft games, check it out down the road if you can. Get it on sale. I don't think you'll be thoroughly blown away by it, but you won't be disappointed if you get it on sale. So there you have it. This has been Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again with another video game first impressions. Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin, for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Now if you don't mind, I have to confront what I believe used to be Garland. And after Jack tries to figure out if this guy is Chaos or not, he will have no choice but to say, "Oh Lordy."